Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, which is being presented as part of the Women Science Entrepreneurship Fund Speaker Series. My name is Agata Smogorzewska and I'm an associate professor and head of laboratory of genome maintenance at the Rockefeller University. I'm also your host for today's program, Demystifying the Therapeutic Development Ecosystem, a roadmap of what you need to know. Our guide for this journey is Dr. Brandy Houser, who I will introduce shortly. First, I would like to tell you a bit about the Women in Science Entrepreneurship Fund, or the WEF, as we like to call it, which was launched at Rockefeller last year. The WEF was created by generous support of women in science who wanted to provide guidance and resources to Rockefeller scientists, particularly women, who wish to pursue translational research, take their discoveries at the bench, and turn them into therapeutics for combating diseases. I would like to thank the early supporters, Rebecca John, Wesley Janeway, Joelle Caden, Marnie Pillsbury, Robin Chambers-Newstein, and Lulu Wong, who have made this new initiative possible. The WEF provides the tools, including training, mentorship, and grants, to help women scientists consider potential applications at their in-lab discoveries for development as medical therapeutics. One important aspect of WEF is a new competitive grants program that is administered through Rockefeller's Robertson Therapeutic Development Fund. WEF grants will fund projects led by Rockefeller women scientists. 3 proof of concept grants were awarded last fall, and I was grateful to be one of the recipients, together with Danny Keahi, a graduate student in the lab, Dr. Mary Beth Hatton, who is Frederick Pirot's professor, head of laboratory of developmental neurobiology, and also Danny's co-mentor. We're exploring potential treatments for a devastating childhood brain cancer called medulloblastoma. And I would like to thank WEF for the support for this exciting project. If you are a woman scientist at Rockefeller and you think your research has potential for therapeutic development, I encourage you to apply in a future round of Robertson TDF grants. The WEF grants are a great source of support for those of you who want to move your research to the next stage of development. And there are some due dates coming up for this grants program. In addition to a grants program, the WEF organizes talks such as this one with women leaders in pharma and biotech. These presentations and conversations are ideal opportunities for us to learn directly from the experts about the biomedical industry, commercialization, and professional development. Following the presentation, there will be a Q&A with the speaker. If you would like to ask a question, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time and type in your questions. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, and don't be shy, type away while Dr. Houser is speaking. And now I'm extremely pleased to introduce Dr. Brandy Houser. Dr. Houser received her Ph.D. in immunology from Harvard University under the guidance of Dr. Jack Strominger for the discovery of specialized macrophage subsets at the human maternal-fetal interface. While at Harvard, she also was a commercialization fellow at the Harvard Medical School, where she worked closely with Technology Transfer Office. After graduation, Brandy served as the Alliance Manager for Partners Healthcare, the corporation that oversees operations of the Massachusetts General Hospital and the Brigham and Women's Hospital. During this time, she managed technologies from both hospitals as well as programs for Pfizer Center for Therapeutics. Brandy has held investors' positions at Brandon Capital Partners, an Australian firm, an Accelerate New York Seed Fund, and a development support position at Mount Sinai. Brandy currently manages the New York and New Jersey office of Celdara Medical, where she's also responsible for sourcing and vetting new pipeline assets. And just last year, she founded the firm Traverse Biotech. Brandy is an expert in financing, preclinical development, and strategy across the entire New York City biotech ecosystem, and is enthusiastic about sharing her knowledge with others. Brandy is also a co-founder of Women Accelerators, a networking community that focuses on giving women the tools to bridge the gender gap in the boardroom from startups to the Fortune 500. She's also a co-founder of Fiddlehead Foundation, a not-for-profit organization that builds dynamic life science ecosystems. Welcome, Brandy, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I really look forward to your exciting and wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much, Agata, and such a pleasure to be here. I've been working in various capacities with the Rockefeller University for a number of years, and so it's an absolute pleasure to have been invited and to be considered, and very, very pleased to be a part of the WEF initiative, and to be sharing the knowledge that I have, and hopefully that will benefit the individuals that are viewing today. So thank you, Agata, for giving a brief background, and I'm not going to belabor it any further, but I do want to highlight here that, again, that I've been working with the Robertson Development Foundation, the Robertson Therapeutic Development Fund since its inception with Bruce Conway as a reviewer, and it's just been absolutely wonderful to be a part of. And more recently, through my work with Celdara Medical, we're currently working with Tom Sackmar's group on his amyloid platform technology. And so that's just been a really tremendous experience and having that collaboration ongoing. Okay, let's me to physically do it. Okay. All right, so without further ado, I'm just gonna jump right into the lesson for today. But really, as you are thinking about translating your science and you think that you have a great idea that could ultimately help patients, and you want to embark beyond the traditional scientific academic work on value creation, or translational work, I think that we all just think that it's a straightforward pathway and it looks something like this. I have a great idea, I'm going to march it forward. I think that the reality is significantly more complex. And there's a lot of decision points that are going to need to be had. And so I'm going to highlight some of those here today so that you can understand those complexities in order to make optimal decisions up front. So the first thing to note is that therapeutic innovation is a multi-dimensional pathway. So what does that mean? One, it takes an extremely long time to reach success, and success is defined as clinical application, on-market applicability. And what you'll notice here is that there's a number of different bubbles or activities that are just being highlighted as part of this multidimensional pathway. Things like clinical trials or markets and finance. I'm really going to start down here and talk today, the closer starting points of what this therapeutic innovation pathway looks like, about ideas through to intellectual property. But it's really important to note that where the starting point really comes from is the culture. And so, it's wonderful to say that Rockefeller really gives a very strong nest, and the WEF specifically is providing a lot of cultural perspectives and understanding and places for innovation to really occur. And so that's where this is where we're starting from. Okay. So the other thing to note as you think about translating your science or developing your science into a therapy is that this is really a team sport. I find that a lot of innovators often think, okay, I created that idea, it's all done now. But there's a really long road ahead. And so it's important to note that in order to bring a single therapy forward from discovery to clinical application requires not just technical skill sets, but also business acumen, as well as a tremendous amount of money and time. And so very generously, I think we're looking at a pretty significant and steep attrition rate, starting with initial target to hit from a small molecule discovery type program, all the way through FDA submission. And the other thing that I really want to highlight here is that you're starting with 24 projects and you're ultimately launching one. And that launch costs you on average about $1.8 billion and takes you almost 14 years. And again, this is not true for every asset, right? I've seen assets that take 3 decades and cost more than this. But it's just really important to realize that this is a very long road. Okay. So, I just want to take a step back and kind of, again, think about it from a different perspective and to give a different type of visual. And so I think most of us would have seen something that looks like this before. And so from a 50,000 foot view of non-clinical, which is everything before clinical development, and clinical development. This is the basic outline of that. And so you're going to start with basic research through to prototype design. Ultimately, you'll enter into your non-clinical activities and into clinical development. And clinical development is really broken down quite broadly into 3 different phases. Phase 1 is typically safety and tolerability studies in humans. Phase 2 is small scale efficacy studies. And phase 3 is expanded patient population, where you're looking for statistically significant efficacy studies to occur. Subsequent to phase 3, you're then going to have FDA filing, approval, launch, and then post-market activities. But for the purposes of the talk today, I really just want to stay right where this blue bubble is, which is, the transition between basic research and discovery, and then bridging the gap into preclinical development. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time on this slide, so just bear with me. So in 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act was created, and this really led to a robust academic technology transfer system that did not happen. So prior to this act occurring, it was up to inventors to actually decide to patent their own inventions. With this came the ability for the institution to actually financially invest in the patenting and also the evaluation, as well as external licensing type arrangements. And so this really gave rise to academic innovation really being capable to be translated externally into biotech and pharmaceutical companies. And so I really just want to walk you through what this life cycle looks like, just so that you have a high level understanding of it. And so when we think about research, and who's paying, it's usually governments and philanthropists pay. And so you think of something like an NIH grant. And this research leads to a discovery. And you say, Eureka, I've discovered the newest molecule or the newest pathway. And then from there, between discovery and disclosure, there's still work to be done. I just want to highlight that this is a great opportunity between discovery and disclosure to work with the Robertson Therapeutic Development Fund, because that can help bridge some of the gaps here. But once you have a discovery and some additional proof of concept work, you're going to disclose this to your tech transfer office, this invention or innovation that you have. The tech transfer office will evaluate, and we'll talk about that on a subsequent slide, this disclosure to determine whether or not they want to move forward with patent filing. If they say, yes, we want to move forward with it, they're going to file that patent. And then they're going to really take ownership of that patent and externalization. And the way that they're going to do that is by marketing. They're going to start looking for external commercialization or development partners that make sense with that technology. And ultimately, they want to undergo a transaction, which is called a licensing arrangement. And this is where they would license, they would provide or give the rights to an external development party to consistently practice that innovation. So it's really important to highlight that from the creation of this Bayh-Dole Act, that it's not the inventor that owns their invention, but it's the institution that employs them. And so this licensing arrangement, whether or not you're a startup who created the invention, or you're a development organization, or you're a venture capital organization, it is absolutely required that you would take a license to the invention. Once you undergo external development, the intent here is that universities and inventors will benefit financially from this, but most importantly, patients will benefit because now you're on the pathway to translation. Okay, so what really happens when you go to give your disclosure to the tech transfer office? What are they going to do? So the first thing that they're going to think about is they're going to meet with you. They're going to discuss, what did you find? How did you do it? What types of things do you want to keep doing? How do you want to pursue this? And they're going to evaluate this technology for patentability or inventiveness and commercial potential. And remember that people inside of the tech transfer office, and specifically at Rockefeller, are highly competent individuals. They typically all have PhDs. They also typically have additional degrees, maybe an MBA or a JD. And so they really are able to understand the science, and they're helping to understand whether or not there's the capability of patenting it. And then subsequently, can they convince a development party to actually take this on? Because as we've already discussed, the timelines, the risks, and the capital required to develop a patent or a product is pretty significant. And so they want to make sure that they think that they can gain traction in the future. And so once they decide, yes, we're going to either file, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, or no, they're going to collaborate with the inventor at that time to discuss options. It could be something that, well, we think that this is better pursued as a proprietary or non-patented type application. And reasons for that could be, trade secrets are just as valuable. Coca-Cola never patented their, formulation, but yet they're obviously a very successful business. Okay. So the other thing that happens when you think about working with the tech transfer and patentability and licensing is to be mindful of the fact that you need to be receptive to feedback. So individuals in a tech transfer office aren't asking you questions or antagonizing you for any particular reason. They're really trying to answer internal questions to make a decision for themselves. And the reason for this is because most discoveries will not actually result in a patent filing, and even fewer will be licensed. And so here what I'm showing you is just a schematic that was taken from Lehigh University that shows you the attrition rate from disclosure all the way through licenses. And so some things that I just really specifically want to highlight is that immediately from disclosure to patent applications, you're cutting it in half. If you look at disclosures to licenses, you're looking at about a quarter. Very few of them end up in startups, and very few of them are actually financially quite successful, right? So there's a pretty big gamut. The other thing I really want to highlight here is that Lehigh University is a university, an engineering focused university. And so it's likely that, compared to basic biology universities or a place like Rockefeller, that this may actually be particularly skewed to the higher numbers. But it's not to say that that's, explicitly true or not. Okay. So some questions that come up are regarding publishing and patenting, and when do you do what, and how do you know what to do? And the advice that I'll give to everyone today is really, before you publish, go and talk to your head of lab and subsequently decide if you need to speak to your tech transfer office, because you should always patent your application or patent your invention before you would externally communicate that. External communication includes everything from a written publication to an abstract to, I'm talking at Mount Sinai down the street. So what it really means is anytime you're going to discuss your innovation or your invention outside of Rockefeller, make sure that you disclose with your head of lab, your tech transfer office, to decide whether or not it should be patented. And I just want to briefly kind of go through the life cycle of a patent filing so that you have clarity and knowledge on what happens when you disclose and should a provisional filing be moved forward. I'm using a rather unattractive slide, so I apologize in advance for it, but it's accurate, and that's quite the important thing here. But it's really important to note that when you say time zero, we're going to file the provisional, you have 12 months. And during this 12 months, this provisional filing is not publicly available. And so you have the opportunity in those 12 months to get as much extra data as you think. So for example, you have a conference that's coming up. You really want to discuss target validation at that conference, which is great. You discuss with your head of lab tech transfer office, and you decide collectively to move forward with a provisional filing. You're going to go and present subsequent to that provisional filing, but you know that you have 12 months to really work extra hard to then continue to do any proof of concept studies that would enable this patent to be more successful in having claims granted in the future. Once you hit this 12 months, you're going to undergo what's called a PCT conversion. This is an international phase conversion. And at this point, everything becomes public. And I think it's really important to recognize, and I made mention to this, we're not speaking in explicit details about it, but patents are defensible positions. They're not offense positions. And so what that means is that once you patent something, you're teaching the world how to practice your invention. And so that becomes available in the PCT stage. This is now public. At the end of the PCT stage at 30 months, you're going to have to make decisions as to your national phase filings. And this is where you're going to actually pursue active discussions with the USPTO or the European Patent Trade Office. And what they're going to be doing is to decide whether or not individual claims can be granted based on other prior art that is in the space. Is this truly inventive and novel? The other thing to recognize here is that patents aren't free. So every time a university elects to patent an invention, it's a significant investment. So when you start with a provisional, if you look at the drafting of a claim set, you're looking at somewhere on the order of about $15,000 to draft a claim set. Plus you have filing fees at every single office action, you're going to have filing fees. Once you go into national phase filing, you will pay filing fees every year to be in that jurisdiction. So for a single patent family, you're looking at about a $30,000 initial investment cost that is ongoing. So it's a little bit different than publishing an academic paper. This is actually a financial investment of the institution into your innovation. Okay, so now I just want to kind of switch over and move away a little bit from the intellectual property discussion and talk a little bit more about the financial economic aspects associated with early stage commercialization. And so here I just want to, again, I'm showing you a very similar diagram to what I previously showed you a couple slides ago, but I want to highlight the players that financially support the commercial development. And so again, just to remind you, government philanthropists are always in play. This is your NIH funding. This can also be, any type of foundations that are out there. And they're financing basic research discovery typically. They can reach into preclinical type work. They typically don't go beyond that. Who starts to take things out are, startups, biotech, venture capital will start to take them out. And very typically, it's pharma that will take things all the way clear out to the market. Now, of course, that is, debunked in a lot of scenarios, especially with the new trends with biotech. But this is pretty traditional, and it gives you a sense of who does what during the development. Okay. So what can you do at the university to create value, to attract these different players in the ecosystem? And so some things that, I'm going to list them here. Some of them we've already gone through, patent filing, but other things that people don't typically think of is, reproducibility in orthogonal models. We all do a single proof of concept and then we kind of move on. But in reality, industry is looking to see, well, can you reproduce it 3 times, 8 times? They want to see it as many times as humanly possible. Can you conduct some early stage toxicity studies? One thing that I find with a lot of academics that they don't really consider things like dose range finding studies. They don't consider dose levels or, doses were selected because of availability of material or the number of mice that were required. And so they have no understanding as to whether or not, this dose level creates a tox signal because they're not looking for it. And so thinking about toxicity as the sort of counterpart to efficacy can provide excellent guidance on how to move forward. Again, I'm going to highlight the RTDF and WEF support, but these grants are really important because they're recognizing internally that this is an innovation that's worth investing in. And above and beyond a patent filing, which is also a financial investment, the institution is again making a secondary investment. So it's pretty significant from third parties who may be interested in taking this forward. Other things that you can easily do is, discuss with scientific collaborators inside of the university, as well as leverage core facilities. And I'll just give a shout out to Fraser Glickman, who runs an excellent high throughput core and has tremendous experience in pharma and biotech. And so you can always go to these different people or core facilities and actually try to resolve some of the questions that you have up front. And these all generate value. Okay. So as you're thinking about value creation and startups, I just wanted to kind of take some time to talk about what these words mean so that as you think about them for yourself, you can make an optimal decision. There's no right or wrong decision here, right? It's just choosing which road or which pathway makes the most sense for you and for the innovation that you've created. And so really briefly, I have defined these different words along the left-hand side. But as we think about valuation, I really just want you to think about valuation is a concept of conversion of an asset or something that is patented, what its financial worth is. And so it's really important to remember that, when you own something or when you create something, you obviously inflate its value versus what does the market say. So just thinking about that conversion. Dilution, the very sort of basic definition occurs when shares of stock are introduced that decrease the existing stockholders' percentage. But another way to think about this is from just a financial capital perspective where, if you're taking someone else's money, you have to give something up for it. And what is that something that you're giving up? It's equity. So it's ownership. And so that's diluting your ownership. And equity is the ability to identify your specific ownership on paper versus a liquid event, so that can be converted in cash. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through a schematic of how to think about using these in early stage biotech development. So let's say that you have created an idea, you have an innovation. Hopefully you've generated intellectual property and that you've accessed that intellectual property from the institution, and you have a great team around you. You look at the value and you say to yourself, okay, I think that this asset is worth $1 million. This has no money into it. There's been no professional investor at the table. No one's telling you whether it is true or not true that it's worth $1 million, but you own 100% of this. But you know that you need to do a proof of concept study, a really significant one. Let's say we're going to do a proof of concept. We want to do it in a cinemacaque model, so it costs a lot of money. And you need to raise what we call dilutive capital, which is capital that's financial capital that's coming from investors. So we say we need $1 million for this. So your post money, which is you haven't conducted any work. Your post money valuation is now 2 million, right? That accounts for the original $1 million that you gave it plus the $1 million you actually took, but you split your ownership now, right? So you have been diluted. Your equity has been diluted. You conduct proof of concept. So you actually put this $1 million to work. You still own 50% alongside of your investor, but the valuation now is 3 million. So by putting that money to work, you converted $1 million into $3 million. Okay. Another way to think about this is not seeking professional investors. Therefore, you don't need a valuation because, if it's just you by yourself or with your A team, you definitely don't need to have professional valuation. You consider non-dilutive capital raises. And so this comes to you in the form of grants. They can be federally derived grants. They can be things like the RTDF grant. And so now you take that $1 million, you still own 100%, and you put that money to work. And so at the end, you still own 100%, but you've increased the valuation to $3 million. And so this is a good example of understanding how non-dilution at the very early stages or not taking dilutive capital too soon really helps you create financial value, what can be considered financial value at the end, and attract smart money. So these are just some ideas to consider. If you think about it on a larger scale, this is really kind of blowing this out well and truly beyond, what I just kind of gave a foundational concept of. And it's important to remember that biotech companies require large amounts of capital with really high probability of never being able to generate a return on investment. But there's just layers of dilution and valuation that's going to go on throughout the life cycle of a single startup company. And so this gives you some perspective of that. So I'm just going to orientate you with the graph first, and then we're going to talk through it. So here you're looking at percent ownership on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you're looking at financial valuation. And across the bottom, each bar graph is representing a different financial capital raise. So as you You have a startup, you're going to raise capital, you're going to put that capital to work. That capital working will create a value inflection, but you're going to continue to need capital through the life cycle of your company. I'm not going to go through, all the different things here, but just note that there are different series of financing. So I'm going to start here with the very beginning. So you're a founder and you own 100%, but your startup is worth very little. So I like to think of it as you own 100% of your cupcake. As you think about the life cycle of this company, you want to look at the founder's equity percentage, right? And what you see is that over time, there's this dilution of equity ownership clear out to the very end where there's an IPO or going onto the market. And the founders now own 22%. But it's really important to recognize that throughout this time, as you were doing capital raises for each series and putting that capital to work and creating value inflection points, that your value is now at something much more significant than $0. And so you own now 22% of a much larger pie. So you have a very value-orientated slice of pie because you shared your equity throughout the dilution in a very smart way that led to the attraction of capital that could be put to work to create a value inflection point. Okay. All right, so that's the economics. Okay, so now you are really thinking about, I understand the economics, I understand intellectual property, but what else do you need to kind of think about with your innovation? And it's really important to remember that your baby is beautiful, but it has warts, right? It's not all the way done. And so at this stage, I really encourage people to be rigorous and honest with the identification of risks with their particular invention up front so that they can work through them today and ultimately try to tackle specific obstacles that can attract quote unquote smart money. And so I just briefly broke these out into a couple different buckets, but of course you could probably make pages of these sorts of questions, but I'm just going to break them down into these 4 buckets here. And the first one is technical risk. Most of the time, individuals look at their invention and they say, great, it works in this mouse model. I've cured solid tumor cancer. But they didn't think about something like, how am I going to manufacture this, at the kilo scale for clinical? Kilo may be too big, but let's call it hundreds of grams scale. And, some examples I think of this is around nanoparticle technologies that have very complex, we're going to load into these, different sorts of nanoparticles. But then when you start scaling that from, a milligram bench scale to even a gram or a 10-gram scale, it becomes impossible, right? The technology can't actually scale. So thinking about these technical risks up front and trying to see if you can resolve them is really meaningful. And it's a little bit outside of just your traditional efficacies type studies. Regulatory risks. So things that, I think about here are, what does your clinical trial look like? So I think that we're all trying to achieve, some sort of opportunity for an unmet medical need, but what does that really mean? And so I guess what I want to kind of call to mind here is that, you have to think about what are your primary endpoints going to look like? And do you think that your invention can move the needle in those clinical endpoints? It's not enough. If you think of something like oncology and you look at something like overall survival, that's great, but do you have a biomarker? Are you thinking about a biomarker? Because maybe overall survival takes 3 years to assess, and that becomes very expensive, prohibitively expensive. And so a commercial entity will say, I don't know, I don't think I want to spend the money on a 3-year clinical trial. So thinking about how you can circumvent that upfront is extremely valuable. Market business risks. So I put here, is there significant unmet clinical need? I think that most people think of those things, but I really want to highlight that different disease spaces have different types of market business risk. And so I'm going to highlight infectious diseases. We all know that, neglected tropical diseases have a high unmet medical need, but there's not a huge market for them. And so, In 2007, in fact, Duke economists came up with this concept of priority review vouchers. And these priority review vouchers are an economic incentive for people to develop things in tropical neglected infectious diseases, as well as pediatric, rare pediatric diseases. And so what that means is that they can go through their entire development, which is very expensive. And when they get to the end and the FDA approves them, the FDA can award them with this priority review voucher. And this priority review voucher has actual economic value, because what this voucher allows somebody to do is to say, oh, you can jump the queue and get reviewed by the FDA sooner by an order of magnitude, so 9 months to a year. If you're a large pharmaceutical company and you have a blockbuster oncology product, that could translate into $100 million, right? Because you have patent life that you're thinking of. So the sooner you can get on market is extremely valuable to you. So that transaction can exist. So it's an economic incentive for people to work in diseases that typically don't have economic incentive. So it's thinking about these things beyond just, is there clinical unmet need? And clinical risk, I think, from a science perspective, we often think, oh, I'll build it and they will come, but clinicians don't necessarily do that. So thinking about and really understanding what are the barriers of their activities for drug delivery from a therapeutic perspective, from a surgical perspective, whatever space you're in, and how does your invention exist with the current workflow, or how can you optimize your invention such that if it needs to change the workflow, that it's making it better, it's making it easier to be adopted by these clinicians. So these are some things to kind of think about that are typically a little bit outside of, just early stage discovery work. Okay, so of course there's many ways to translate science, but since this is really focused on startups, I wanted to kind of give some ideas or some thoughts about what your preferred pathway to translation may be. And so again, really simplified this as to dropping them into 3 buckets. And the first one is you can out-license in collaboration with head of lab and the tech transfer office to any type of development organization in order to sort of maximize what makes the most commercial sense for you to do that. And so this would be sort of sitting with the tech transfer office and really spending enough time to try to make that licensing transaction happen, as well as really supporting them. Maybe that results in some sort of consulting arrangement for yourself, but you're really just trying to make the technology transfer into an organization that can take it forward. Another position that you can consider is becoming a CEO or a CSO, and actually starting your own company and then subsequently in-licensing your intellectual property into this company. But I would encourage you to kind of think about, why do you think you can find success in this role? And what do you need to do to acquire the skill set to really become successful in this role? I also would really encourage you to think about what your personal financial risk is, right? Because the reality is that if you're going to do a sort of traditional startup in the sense that, there's no paycheck coming in. And for some people that's meaningful, for some people it's not. But I think thinking through this is really just an important activity. And finally, the one that I think most people kind of forget about is that you can actually stay inside of the academy and continue to do what you do best, which is invent serially. And this is really fantastic. It's an opportunity to continue to do what you love and to generate more inventions that can be deployed in all different types of organizations. And it's also important to know that inventors are entitled to a portion of the licensing proceeds. So in the event that, any of your inventions are ultimately transacted into a license, that there is a portion of those financial proceeds that are received by the university that are shared with the inventors. And so I think that's important to recognize as a financial opportunity, as opposed to just equity as an opportunity. Okay. All right, so just to kind of wrap things up for everyone, but this is a really fantastic time to think about, translational possibilities for your research and really just to reach out inside of your community. I tried to give as many ideas as I could, but all of the resources that are available to you, so really use them. Definitely want to highlight to you that industry needs to partner with academia. So 30, 40 years ago, innovation was centralized to pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies, and that's no longer the case. So industry absolutely needs to find innovation external to its walls, and academia is an unbelievable source of innovation. So they are looking to partner. Rockefeller is unbelievably poised and exceptional to support your efforts to translate research. So reach out to your community. And from an external perspective, there's great resources, happy to talk to you about them. One of them is eLab. I actually will give some of that information. iCorp's Fiddlehead, which is the whole purpose of the foundation that I created, is specifically to educate individuals in this space. But it's really important that you think of the ways that you want to do this, because it's really rewarding to see your discoveries actually reach patients. And there's so many ways to do that. And hopefully you get a sense of that just from this talk. Okay, so finally, really, make friends, start talking to people within the sort of broader beyond Rockefeller ecosystem as well. But the New York City life science biotech ecosystem, I think, is really unique. It's really passionate and it's growing. And the people that are here are, they're really dedicated to making this place thrive. And so reaching out to them, finding like-minded people that can help you along the way. I really encourage you to do that. I also just want to shout out that, from a institutional perspective, here are some of the places that I highlighted that you can definitely go to, and a big thank you to the Women Science Entrepreneurship Fund. But alongside of the Robertson Therapeutic Development Fund, this is a great avenue to find resources and support, as well as the Tech Transfer Office. And then beyond that, I'm just highlighting New York Bio and eLab and the individuals that are associated with them that I think are just great context to be had in the ecosystem. Okay, and that's it. So if any of this is interesting to you, pleased for you to reach out to me and happy to connect and talk to you further about it. But really exciting time to be translating your science.
Thank you so much, Brandy. That was terrific, and you shared so generously with us. We will now take some questions, and as a reminder, you can submit them through the Q&A question function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please start asking. And I have many questions. One of them is, you think that you had a great invention, but the university doesn't really think that this should be patented by the university. What are the options here?
Well, I think that my first suggestion would be, if they said that they don't want to patent it, is to have them explain to you in pretty good detail why they don't want to patent it, and see if, because it could be something like, well, if you go and do X, Y, and Z, then this is it. Or, there's prior art in the space and we're going to actually share the publications with you. And that way you have complete clarity on what, I guess what you're missing or what you don't know exists. I think at the end, if you have a complete disagreement, you can likely request that you are entitled to self-patent it. But again, then you'll be footing those bills and doing all the marketing and everything like that. And I have yet to witness a scenario where the Tech Transfer Office didn't pursue a patent that was successful. So that's the only thing I can say. That's just anecdotal, though. I don't have any data.
Okay, that's great. And a lot of your ventures have been in New York City. Do you think that New York City is special in any way? Are we moving in the right direction for having the right environment for us or a budding entrepreneurship venture?
Absolutely. I think that people look to Boston and they think about, and Boston's a great place, so it's not anything against them, but the reality is that it's very saturated. And so as an entrepreneur, right, you're going to be one of many people, but in New York, you actually still have the opportunity to shine. And so in terms of quality of science, I would say Rockefeller is an elite institution in terms of quality of science. So there's no reason to think that the innovation doesn't exist here. And so I think that, there's a lot of at-risk capital. It's just thinking creatively through what looks different, right? Maybe we don't have the big biotech VCs here, but you do have Versant that has a presence here. Deerfield has a massive presence here. Alexandria, these are a lot of big players that play globally and nationally. And so they're right in our backyard. So leveraging them is really important. So I do think that the ecosystem is pretty unique to be in.
Mm-hmm.
That's just me,
That's
though.
great. We have one request for a slide of pre-post valuation comparing taking outside money versus getting grants. We should also mention that this will be available as a recorded talk and webinar. So there will be, people will have an option of looking at the slides later, which I think is great because there was a lot of information that you've provided. So I'm not sure if we, maybe at the end when we have time, if there are no other questions, then we'll go to that slide. So here's a question about biggest mistakes. So what are the mistakes that a novice entrepreneur can make in this space? I'm sure there are many. Can you highlight some that you think are the most important?
Yeah, I think it's I think having this perspective that, oh, I no longer want to be in the academic institution, so I'll just be a CEO. And there's, you can fan that all out. There's, dozens of different types of positions that you can be in between those two. And similar to academic training, right? It takes 10 years to really achieve success. And so to just stop one day and say, I'm going to do something else that I don't know anything about, and somehow I'm going to achieve success seems a little bit strange to me. So it's actually very hard to successfully start an organization. And there's a lot of things that you don't know. So it's really taking the time to figure out whether or not that path is truly what you want. And if it is, to figure out how you get training to be on that path, right? Because you may not be getting that in your academic experience. So how do you find those people and start to actually do that? And so there's a lot of educational opportunities. They can be didactic, where it's just a class or a seminar like this, but really hands-on understanding it and owning some of that risk is, it's very terrifying when the day you quit your job and you don't have a paycheck, right? And you're like, okay, I only have 6 months runway, so we got to make this happen.
Sure.
Well, a little bit different.
So we have a question from Lulu Wong. Thank you so much for this terrific discussion, Brandy. With the extraordinary acceleration enjoyed during the development of COVID vaccines, how might the traditional timeline between the basic research and market be markedly shortened? And how might our young entrepreneurs tap into this?
Oh, that's Lulu. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's really interesting. I actually think that some of the vaccine development that we saw with COVID was well poised. The concept of using RNA, which was actually originally pioneered by a woman, and then obviously dismissed for 2 decades, was sort of in the works. And so the backbones and the structures and things like that were able to be rapidly deployed, especially on those types of platforms, which are just much more easily sort of created. But I think that the reality was that the shortened timeframes came from regulators actually supporting these efforts. So it gives an indication of how long things take because of the regulations involved. And I didn't spend any time talking about that, so I apologize, but the FDA really dictates the amount of time that a lot of these activities take. And so if they speed up, or if you can get them to move faster or be more focused, then of course you can sort of crunch those timelines, along with the type of the RNA type technology or the basic vaccine technology, and also not doing anything else because it was pretty important. In terms of how that would impact other entrepreneurs, I don't have a fantastic answer for that in any way, but I would encourage that, because in something like that RNA technology that we're now actually able to deploy as a vaccine strategy, this comes from decades of work that was founded within the academic institution completely. And so working on things that are extremely high risk, are sort of blue sky, maybe this sounds like, the space age type thing, being brave enough to sort of pursue those types of scientific innovations is what gave us the ability to be poised as a society to be there. And I think that's the only thing I can really add to that.
Great, thank you. Andre Morris is asking, how can graduate students develop their entrepreneurship spirit alongside their technical training?
Yeah, so my advice is to find a type of internship activity that you can do that's flexible. So this is something that Fiddlehead or even Celdara, this is what we do. So I now have actually spent the time I've trained, I think about 30 different people that have transitioned straight from academia into professional biotech careers. And really happy to talk to you if you're interested in the organizations that I'm affiliated with. But otherwise, if you think you have an interest in, it doesn't matter, venture capital, tech transfer, patenting, anything that you think you can barter your own technical skill set for to gain an additional skill set to try, I would just approach people and offer to see, do you have a flexible internship type program that I can do, and get that hands-on training. I think that's extremely valuable. And the more that you kind of, pursue a combination of, didactic webinar type series like this, and you're actually you're trying things on for size, will get you closer to knowing what you want to do. That would be my advice to it. I mean, I remember I interned with some investment bankers, and I very clearly decided against it, but it was a fantastic opportunity because I knew what I was deciding against at the time.
Some of those successes in trying things are very, very useful and helpful for making decisions, right?
Absolutely.
So there's another question from Audrey Hernagel. The patent timeline that Brandy showed on her slide can take as long as 30 months. How does this line up with the timeline for a trainee who typically will need publication, etc., in order to advance their career? I think that's a very important question, right? We have to submit abstracts. We need to talk about our work. So how do we do that? We need to put papers on bioarchives.
Yep, I completely understand. So that's why I said that there's only, so you don't have to, but typically in most cases you would file what's called a US provisional. And for the first, so from the filing of the US provisional until the end of 1 year, it's considered not confidential. But because you've already planted the flag in the sand, you can go ahead and publish, right? It's important to note. Now, you will definitely want to work with the tech transfer office in that time frame, because if you're building your patentability, you may want to delay publishing to time it with your PCT. But the longest that you would be waiting would be 1 year, not 30 months, because once you have that PCT conversion, it's public anyway. So it's the same as having published.
Right, but this highlights the fact that we should engage the tech transfer quite early on in the process, so that
so
understand.
That's exactly right. Work with your head of lab, work with tech transfer to see, is this something that's commercially viable? Do you guys have interest in pursuing this? And then having feedback straight away. And, but the reality is that you can file a provisional on Monday and present on Tuesday, right? So you just want to make sure you have the flag in the sand.
Right. So maybe we're coming to close, but I wondered whether you could talk a little bit about the Women's Accelerators and how you came up with the idea, and also who is involved now and who you help.
Yeah, happy to. So Women Accelerators. So we founded Women Accelerators in 2011, and I did this with two other ladies, Susu Wang and Su Ling Ning. And really this came from this perspective of, I was exiting grad school and I had some amount of mentorship, but I didn't really have any clarity, and I didn't really have any women that were specifically helping me figure out what I wanted. And, I created an organization, a 501c3. So this is a not-for-profit organization that specifically offers mentorship and guidance. And I didn't want something where there's a lot of organizations where there's fees, these sort of inordinate fees and things like that. And so we wanted to encourage specifically younger women to be able to come to these events and to be able to receive mentorship and things like that in their community. And so that's really where the idea came from. It's now morphed. We've actually been successful in applying for grants and receiving grant financing to continue forward, as well as sponsorship and things like that from different organizations that do have interest in supporting this platform. But the reality is that we're still explicitly focused, and I'm sure that you'll see if you go to the Women Accelerators website that it's a lot of very young faces, which is great. Doing a lot of different things. I would say that it's better than 80% in biotech, but it is nested it's quite geographically based to the Boston community. So it's not surprising that everybody's in biotech there. But that's not the intention of it. It's meant for all comers, and it's really to sort of combat any sort of issue that women have and during their professional lifetime.
Mm-hmm. And you recently founded the new company, Traverse. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of doing that?
I'd be happy to. So I'm so pleased to introduce Traverse. This is such a brave new adventure that I'm working on with a person named Jean-Louis Romay-Lemon, who is a previous founder of a company called IDM, and IDM ultimately exited to Takeda Pharmaceuticals around a product called Mepact or mefirmatide, which is a product for pediatric osteosarcoma. And so really fantastic to have the opportunity to work with him. And what we're focusing on at Traverse is, taking ex-US innovation outside of the US and actually bringing it specifically into New York to leverage the at-risk capital that's here in the city. Because we do believe that New York City does provide a fantastic ecosystem, but what we thought was lacking was sort of upper level management and entrepreneurial experience. And so we said, okay, great, if we can actually create that and build that with validated, basically near-term clinical assets, that we would be contributing to the ecosystem by which the asset comes from, and we'd be contributing to the ecosystem here. So that's really where the idea comes from. Right now, we're actively capital racing, which is a very challenging place to be, as I'm sure everyone knows, but very pleased to be on the road.
Okay. Well, this was fascinating, and I'm really grateful for your ability to join us, and thank you also for all your work that you do for the Robertson Fund and being a reviewer. Hopefully, it's a little bit of fun to learn about new possibilities and new projects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I think this was wonderful. I also would like to thank our audience for participating in today's session and asking your questions. We look forward to you joining us in the next WEF webinar. And in the meantime, you can find out more about the WEF on our website, which will be shown momentarily on the closing slide. Finally, I would like to thank our speaker, and also, again, to our lead supporters, to Women in Science Entrepreneurship Fund, who have helped launch this vital series of webinars and also support the grants. Have a wonderful evening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again.